What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Moda synth, which is a physical modeling engine by Physical Audio, which thank you to Physical Audio for sending me a copy. It's not very often that, for one, I'm looking to get a new synth. Even though I've been doing a bunch of reviews, this is more of like a tonal or harmonic synthesizer. And it's also very rare when I feel compelled to actually write a track. So to get a glimpse of what this can do, anything that you see in blue and green, meaning these three, is kind of what I wrote for this garage tune. I'm still working on it. I literally started it yesterday, but this is what it sounds like. I would love it if you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you like what you're about to hear. Yeah, so the tonalities and the timbres that this instrument can create are very exciting to me, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to review this in the first place. Because it's a physical modeling engine, it's very atypical of your traditional subtractive synthesis, where you start with a sound, you add some effects to it, and then you sculpt it with filtering and distortion and blah blah blah. This is more of like a weird instrument that I wouldn't know what to call this, and you can kind of shape the anatomy of it in order to create different timbres. So physical modeling as a whole is really designed to create realistic sounds by trying to replicate things that, for an example, if you have a drum, you have an exciter, which is what you're hitting the drum with. You have the membrane, which would be the anatomy of the drum itself. Then you have a resonator, which is like the sounds that bounce out of, or like the resonances that it creates, either in real space or whatever. You can achieve physical modeling stuff sort of by, maybe implementing an FM sound through comb filters and convolution reverb and impulses of white noise and small amounts of reverb, and build stuff through that. But this is something that is very difficult to replicate in its entirety. It goes beyond just those effects. And that's part of the reason why I liked it when I heard it. Shout out to Dash Glitch and Data Broth for introducing me to this. And again, thanks for Physical Audio for sending me a copy of this. Whenever I find a synth or something that I know I'm going to gel with, I tend to want to review. So that's why we're here. Now, the way that this works is you have a few different options between strings in a plate, and plates. And over on the left, you can choose between the different strings. So you've got damping, which damping is like, if I were to send a sound against a wall, the reverberation or the frequencies would bounce less the more damping I have. It's like when you have acoustic panels or something and you send a signal into the panels, it deadens the sound. It's kind of what that does. You'll see this a lot on reverb and stuff. Tone is the brightness. The type is kind of like a string to a bar. So within this in particular, the more that it's to the right, it's going to sound like you're playing a string. The more that's to the left, like a bar, it's going to be like more akin to a xylophone or something of the sort. So with the stretch, you can kind of basically control the tension of the chord or tension of the string, which to me is really cool, because if I were to do something like this, so with that, I didn't mean to push play, but you can kind of, I really like the ability to do that, especially for creating synth lines, you know what I'm saying? Just something like that. Imagine applying some effects to it. It could be really cool. Sorry, just sidebar. Before we get into the positioning and stuff, with the other strings, you can actually change the tuning of them, which is pretty cool, and also change the type that it is. And with this, you can say, okay, well, this is at 8. We can make this +7 semitones. We can change the mass ratio and again the stretch as well to kind of just create a more like it's imperfect, I guess would be the best way to say that, which I think is really cool. So we can kind of just modify these a bit, and then with these positions you have a microphone in relation to, I think, the instrument. And that's really cool because let's say you want to listen to this signal and you're in a 3D space or whatever. I'm playing the instrument here, but instead of the microphone being right here, it's like over on this side, or it's, you know, in a different position. And to be honest, it really comes down into like panning and whatnot, but I just like that you have this like duality between this because it does provide like a little bit more realism to what we have. So we have pluck. The more pluck you have, the more striking of the sound it's going to be. You have attack, which, and then obviously release. So that's pretty standard. Within this, we've got multi-strike, which if you wanted to create kind of like an arpeggiator, we could do that. And one thing that I really like about this is that you can apply how much force is being added to that strike, which would be kind of like velocity, but I like that you can randomize the force or the velocity. It just sounds really nice. Now you can change the rate of this, of course, and sync it up, but I like the ability to maybe start like this and then start from really slow and go fast and then go slow again. So like, it's just, it sounds so cool to me. You can sync this if you want to. You can go up to 4x. So but you know, just kind of a neat thing. Now with the connections here, this has to do with the springs or the coils, I guess, that are in relation to these. I'm not quite sure what this is to describe it, but this one is a typical spring, but also what it does is it changes the relation between the strings that are surrounding. So for example, if we put this on here, you can see that this spring is connected to the string here, and then this other one is connected to this, which I find to be really interesting. You can also change up to 3 different maps. So, you know, you can kind of just get down here. But what this means for the sound is that it's just going to naturally change the timbre. We can adjust the strength and the speed. And if you're using these guys, then you can change the gap. So that's so pretty. It's so cool. Yeah, this thing is really cool. Now with these LFOs, it's not like your typical like LFO carries out something else. It has to do with the strength and the speed and the gap. So this is more of somebody playing or like wiggling a string or something. If you're playing too high of a note, I've come to realize that it will not work, but the lower you play, the more that this will affect this. So I would just get in here and kind of change these and see how you might like to mess with these. But yeah, it's really interesting. And depending on what notes you play, it's going to affect the strings in different ways. So now you can hear that it changes. And that's what I like about it so much, is that it's not just like a typical LFO or something. Like, depending on how this is played out, it's really kind of shaping this in a very natural way. So over on the right, you've got a low pass filter, and you've got some resonance, of course, and then some drive, and makes it sound really nice, especially when you add some reverb here at the bottom. Sorry, there's something in my eye. And before I go any further, one thing that I want you all to be careful of is whenever you're doing this kind of synthesis, be very careful with the resonances and whatnot, because, or rather work at a low volume, because sometimes you can definitely overdo it, which can be extremely sharp to your ears. And that's not a product or a byproduct of Modus. It's more of a thing about physical modeling in general, because you're always working with high resonant sounds. So just be careful. We're going to try to avoid that today, but just as a means of exploring the rest of the synth. Let's turn the delay on. I'm working with a QWERTY keyboard. I should have plugged in this, but that's totally fine. Now we can also adjust the level and decay of the reverb now, and this is where you want to be careful, because you can start to stack insane amounts of reverb over themselves and create those crazy resonances. But let's see what this sounds like. It's just nice, man. We pretty much created like a natural sounding harpsichord or something. And you really want to go and get in down and dirty with this and try to mess with, you know, the placement of all these, because it will shape the timbre and almost create a completely different instrument from it. That was a lot of different timbres that we just surfed through by only moving a couple of dials, and we still haven't even changed all of the other stuff or explored the other two options yet. So there's a lot of diversity within this, and I wouldn't really think about this as like a, you know, it's an end-all be-all super synth. It's more of like a very malleable contact instrument that doesn't take up nearly as much RAM or CPU power. Surely for the fact that it is still kind of like all stays within a particular characteristic of sound. But if you have a little bit of, I guess, you know, sound design under your belts, then you can easily change this into something else, kind of like with what I did on this particular instrument of changing it into a Bram. So, or a Bram, whatever you want to call it. And for this, I'm not really going to talk a whole lot about it, but I just added some distortion and some delay and a bunch of reverb, and that kind of gave it that really harsh and like dark and gritty sound. And this is great for creating things that are not only tonal but also atonal, because when you get into things like the plate and introduce that, there's a lot of different like weird kind of sounds and textures that you're going to get from it. So speaking of, we've got the strings and plate now. I think the strings are limited to 2, because you don't really have a lot of options within this other than changing the setup here. But within the strings, it's pretty much the same thing. And then when we get into the plate, you have these placements here of these different microphones, which again is kind of cool. We can adjust the mass of like how thick I guess the plate is what I would imagine. We can change this to duophonic, which I don't really know what that means, but it will change the timbre. And what I like about this as well is you can adjust the fundamental. This really only comes into play when you play on the lower notes, but it just sounds so cool. Yeah, it's really nice. So everything else applies within the strings and the plates, which kind of go into that. But let's go ahead and hop over to the plates on their own now, because there's a few different options that you can change. So the first thing that I want to direct your attention to is the driver position. I'm not really sure if this means like, if this is like exciter, or if this means like where the oscillation is coming from. If you're sending a saw wave through like to the plate, maybe it's going direct to the center or something, or a strike. Not quite sure. I did want to point out a small bug with this. If I close this out and we take a look at it and then I open it back up, it resets where these are. So if I were like over here and then I close it out and open it back up, it resets them. I'm not sure if it's supposed to do that or not, but it's kind of odd to me I've also had another bug to where I was recording this actually a few minutes ago, and for some reason it shut off all of the Modus things and to where it would not recognize MIDI anymore. But if I played the track that already had MIDI incorporated into it, it would still play. So I don't really know what that's about. I don't know if that's a Bitwig V Modus thing, but if you do have that problem, just close the DAW and then open it back up. Even if you save it, it's okay and it will work again. But in any case, with this driver position, you have a choice between the saw and the sine and the strike. So this is where you get into more like atonal territory, and it sounds super cool. And I think this really comes into play with what we're talking about of creating this fundamental here, but take a listen. So like if we were to send this into some crazy distortion here, so maybe we would use, I'm not gonna use that, but we'll just use like some large amounts of saturation. And let's turn the fundamental down. And let's crank the distortion up on this by quite a bit. Then we can kind of start to shape this with quite a bit of different timbres and stuff to create insane sounds. And this is kind of where, like, if you have a little bit of wherewithal within physical modeling and stuff in the first place, that you can kind of like start to manipulate this. But they really complement each other from using some of these tricks and techniques based off of what it is that you're given. So I'm going to do this, but I'm also going to grab a clipper, I guess if you will, and kind of turn it down just in case, so that way we don't destroy our ears. But through playing with some of these things and adding these, we can kind of you can get into some crazy stuff. So if we were to add like a crystalline or something, shout out to Baby Audio. This is one of my favorite reverbs. We can get into like those crazy sounds. So as a means of like creating, and this is just the beginning, these are just a few different effects that sound really cool. But within that, you can see that by taking something that has a really strong impulse, that we can manipulate that. This will keep, I believe, the stuff more tonal. But you can still get some cool sounds by changing the fundamental as well. We're going to lower this a bit to try not to blow our ears out. But within this, yeah, also maybe back off of the decay and the release, because if we start to stack a bunch of sounds on here, then it might get pretty crazy. But same thing here, we can change this with different stuff. And what might be cool is to have one strike on one plate and then an actual sound like this on the other. It looks like these are both the same, so that's okay. But even still, this is universal. You can still change the placement of these if we take a look. Or if we were to hit yeah, so it looks like you can't turn the multi-strike on with this. I think that it's just constant whenever the strike is turned on. But, and then also if we go into the saw and sine, you can't turn the multi-strike on either, but that's okay. You can literally just, you know, do something like that if you wanted to. Within this though, one thing that I've realized is that you want to kind of just keep your eye on what turns off whenever you switch things over. So for example, if I turn this into the sine, you'll notice that the low pass filter's turned off. If I turn this into strike, you'll see that this is constantly turned on. So and then you also lose the attack, decay, and release of this. So there's just certain things, I'm not really sure why that is, but I guess it's just the way the cookie crumbles. But even still, there's a ton of options that you can use. I think that this is a kill option, I want to say. I'm not really too sure what that button does, but for whatever reason, if I want to randomize this, then I could also do that as well. I like that there's an undo button, at least for this particular setting, whenever you randomize something. And then also, you do have MPE over here, and you've got this final EQ over on this side. That's just a couple of shelvings, which is a low shelf and a high shelf. So aside from that, that's pretty much the anatomy of how this synth goes. But for me, having a cool physical place to start with and then get into the processing that I normally do anyways is kind of what I'm most excited for. But I mean, yeah, this is an awesome synth, and I think that it's relatively cheap right now. If we go to physicalaudio.com, let's figure out how much this is. I don't have an affiliate link for you, but I know that Data Broth does. I know that Dash Glitch does. Sorry, it's physicalaudio.uk. Physical audio. Here we go. I clicked the wrong one. I'm sorry. My accuracy is total trash right now. Physicalaudio.uk. Physical audio. Let's try that one. There we go. So if we go to Modus, right now it is on sale for $69. So it's a pretty good deal. You should also check out the other stuff that they have to offer, just because they're all kind of, they all sound a lot like this. And I'm not sure how different they are particularly, but I know that Data Broth has a bunch of stuff on this from the past. So definitely give it a shot. Check it out. Try the demo if you think that you'd be interested in it. And I'm not going to tell you to go and buy it, but it's more of like, here's why I like it. And you know, I am going to be using this to create a lot of different effects and sounds and textures and whatnot in the future to come. So thanks you guys for watching my video. I really appreciate it. I would love it if you liked and subscribed. If you want to support my channel, check out alchemy.com or consider becoming a member or book a lesson with me, so that way we can get you where you want to be as far as your musical journey. But yeah, thanks everybody. I'll see you in the next one.